Okay. So, today is Wednesday, October 11th, and I'm saying that just on behalf of people who might be watching the recording of this. 5 days into the war with Hamas, and I don't know about you, but I've been kind of glued to my phone and reading updates on Times of Israel. Times of Israel is my go-to website for news from Israel. It's just my own personal preference. Some people like Jerusalem Post, some people like Haaretz. I like Times of Israel, and the news just becomes more devastating hour by hour, day by day, and we thought we had lived through the worst of it at the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. Um, and the intifadas, plural, but this is just devastating. So our prayers are with the state of Israel. Our prayers are with the citizens of Israel, and frankly, our prayers are for a speedy end to this war, the safe return of all the hostages, if that could miraculously be done, and an eradication of Hamas from the face of the earth. That doesn't mean I'm praying for the eradication of Palestinian people. I am not. I'm praying for the eradication of Hamas, the this monstrous, barbaric terrorist organization, their eradication from the face of the earth. So I am troubled by the sense of vengeance I feel, and anger and hatred, and I'm trying to temper that, and to try to be as humanitarian and peaceful as possible. But the more videos come out and news comes out of the atrocities, the barbaric animal atrocities that Hamas perpetrated, the less, the harder it is for me to feel love and harmony. So I wanted to look at, well, let me just say this. There is a Montgomery County Jewish community vigil that's going to happen at Har Shalom tomorrow night. I will not be there because the planned program that we have at Sandy Spring Museum about anti-Semitism in America and viewing the film Repairing the World is still going to go on. So, so we're doing that tomorrow night, but Rabbi Jesse Nagelberg of B'nai Shalom of Olney reached out to me yesterday to see about the two of us conducting a prayer vigil, and that's going to happen on Sunday at B'nai Shalom of Olney at noon. So I'm in the midst of planning that, and so that will be our opportunity. It will be available on Zoom. More information will come out about that again for that if people can't make it in person. So, okay. So with that said, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I wanted to look at the end of this week's Torah portion, Bereisheet, starting a new cycle of Torah readings, which we started on Simchat Torah, which in and of itself was tempered because of what was going on in Israel. So I want to read from the end of the portion and also the beginning of next week's portion, because as we know, Torah readings are broken up in the middle of a chapter. And it's a couple of sentences into next week's portion that I really want to get to, But I want to start on page 33 in the Eitz Chaim, the start of chapter 6 of the book of Genesis. Chapter 6 of Genesis, page 33 in Eitz Chaim, or whatever edition of Chumash you have. It's near the beginning of the 7th Aliyah. Okay? So we have the portion, chapters 1 and 2 describe the creation of the world, slightly different stories. Chapter 3 is the Garden of Eden story. Chapter 4 is the Cain and Abel story. Chapter 5 is the list of generations from Adam and Eve to Noah. Okay, so that's the first 5 chapters in a nutshell. Chapter 6 then has this for us. Vayehi ki hechel ha'adam larov al pnei ha'adama uvanot yoldu lahem. And it came to pass when humanity, well, I guess it makes more sense to translate it like Eitz Chaim does, when men, right? So it's meant to be gender focused in this way and not meant to be translated as gender neutral. So when men began to increase become greater in number on the face of the earth, daughters were born to them. So this strange wording here is all because the only woman that we know about from the first 5 chapters of Genesis is, no, the only specific woman is Eve. Okay, but in each generation that is born from Adam to Noah, we're told about a main person who is the main one for that generation. And then it says they lived such and such years, and they were born to them sons and daughters. All right, so we're told throughout chapter 5, if you just look on page 32, at page 32, the very first word, Metushelach shlosh ma'ot shana, that means Methuselah lived 300 years, Vayoled banim uvanot, and he gave birth to sons and daughters. Okay, and then we have it in verse 26. Methuselah, after he gave birth to Lamech, he lived 282 years. No, 82 and 782 years. And Vayoled banim uvanot, and he gave birth to sons and daughters. So we do know sons and daughters were born. Men and women were born in every generation. Okay? So now, we're just being reminded here in chapter 6, when men increased on the face of the earth, daughters were born to them. Okay? It's just this very strange phrasing, and trying, I guess, to explain how women came to be and how there could be people, right? So we have that question in chapter 4 with Cain and Abel, because then Cain goes off to wander, and he's supposed to, he marries some woman. So where does that woman come from? Because all we know about is Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. Where did women come from? So we get a bizarre interpretation from Rashi that there are a couple of extraneous words in chapter 4 in the description of the birth of Cain and Abel. In Hebrew, we have the word et, aleph, tuf, which is there grammatically, and you can't really translate it. So it's kind of like the T-H-E. It's kind of like the word the, but grammatically sometimes you need the word et for whatever grammatical purpose. So there are a few extra words of the word et, and Rashi says that means that girls were born. Okay, so that's how we could explain how Cain could marry someone and have children when we didn't have girls mentioned in Adam and Eve giving birth to any girls. So it just raises the question then of incest and whatnot. So it all stems from, and I'm sorry I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but it's reflected with this chapter 6 verse 1 to try to explain the presence of women in the world. It's only an issue about where did all these women come from. It's only an issue if we're reading the Torah very literally, right? If we read the Torah literally, that the world came into being exactly as the Torah described here, then it's a problem or a challenge to explain where did women come from. But if we understand the story as a response to, like a human response to the world around us, then it's not a problem. It's just the way people are writing the story and how the tradition of the creation of the Jewish world came into being, right? This is the Jewish origin myth. The first 11 chapters of Genesis is the origin myth, and then from chapter 12 of Genesis until the rest of the Bible, it's the Israelite origin story. All right, so you have the general origin story, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and then narrowing it down to the Israelite family origin story. Okay, so if it's the origin story, then it's kind of assumed that men and women are going to be around. And that what's really only important for the Torah to include is just how this impacts the Israelite life. Okay, so the story of Adam and Eve, the story of the creation of the world, okay, so there's some order that God presents to the creation of the world. There aren't dinosaurs listed. Is this a problem? No, because dinosaurs haven't existed in hundreds of millions of years, and the story of Genesis, it predates Moses by a couple hundred years. That's all that we need to understand of the story of the Torah, that the whole purpose of the Torah is to get to Mount Sinai. So you only need the highlights of the history in order to get to Mount Sinai. You don't need to know the story of cavemen. You don't need the story of Neanderthals. You don't need the story of dinosaurs. You don't need the story of the Ice Age, because that's frankly not important for getting to Mount Sinai. What's important is there's a God, and that's the encounter at Mount Sinai. So you got to talk about God, and you got to talk about people and how we, as the Israelite family, got to Mount Sinai. So that's all you need. So then it's not a problem anymore as to the details. Why aren't dinosaurs in the story? Why aren't women in the story? Because really, frankly, it's not important. It's secondary information to the primary information of the history of the Israelite people. Okay? So for me, then, it's not a problem that girls aren't mentioned in the Torah specifically, and girls aren't mentioned here. So that's my take on this. Okay? So we go on with verse 2 on page 33. Vayir'u v'nei ha'Elohim et benot ha'adam ki tovot heina vayikhu lahem nashim mikol asher bacharu. So this is a very troubling verse. The sons of God saw the daughters of man, that they were beautiful, and they took them for as wives from among all they chose. Okay, so now this divine beings and took wives. So let's look below the line first. Traditional commentators, Onkelos, that's the Aramaic translation, Rashi, Hirsch, he's an Orthodox German rabbi, Samson Raphael Hirsch, from almost 200 years ago, strive to avoid the mythologic implications of this account. Okay, now, if we saw the Russell Crowe movie about Noah that came out a couple years ago, a lot of that has to do with this right here. The idea of sons of God cavorting with daughters of man. Okay, there's some bizarre mythological story that this is referencing that makes its way into the Torah right here without further explanation. So there's some myth here, and Onkelos, Rashi, and Hirsch avoid this because clearly it's a problem. Who are the sons of God? God doesn't have sons. What does this mean? What kind of creatures are we talking about here? It's kind of hard to explain it. So it goes on. They understand the divine beings to be the noble descendants of Seth, intermarrying with the descendants of Cain, 34 below the line, who offered physical attractiveness but no moral standards. So in other words, the genealogical line that is focused on here is we have Cain and Abel and Seth. Okay, three sons. So after Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve had a third son, Seth. That's in the genealogy of chapter 5. So so Abel was killed by Cain, no kids. Cain, there's a genealogy there of chapter 4 of descendants of Cain. But we, as Israelites, are descended from Seth. Okay, so humanity traces back its roots in the Torah from Abraham to Noah to Seth to Adam. Okay, so that's the line that's presented here. So because that's the line that leads to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and leads to then the family of Israel, this is the noble line that these commentators suggest that we are already chosen, even though God didn't choose Abraham and Sarah yet. God will in chapter 12. But all of the generations leading up to Abraham and Sarah are noble. So that's how those commentators explain the sons of God. They are more noble than the rest of humanity. Okay, and that the girls that they are lustfully falling in love with are the daughters of the generations of Cain. Okay, so that's how the commentators explain. The commentary below the line continues on 34. Whatever the ancient roots of this story, no Jewish commentator accepts the notion of a sexual union between divine beings and mortals, giving rise to a semi-divine race. Okay, so that's what it seems like here is happening in verse 2, and the Jewish commentators just ignore it or reinterpret it as just a highfalutin way of explaining the Bnei Elohim as being these descendants of Seth, the more noble people around. Okay, so verse 3, Vayomer Adonai, Lo yadon ruchi va'adam la'olam, b'shagam hu vasar, v'hayu yamav mea ve'esrim shana. So now, the result of the cavorting of sons of God with daughters of man could mean a sense of immortality, kind of like a Greek myth, right? You have gods coming down and falling in love with mortal human beings, right? And then you have semi-godlike mythological people. right? Isn't Hercules one of those? I'm not up on Greek mythology, but Hercules is supposed to be like this product of a union between a god and a mortal human being, right? So you have some superhuman or supernatural elements in those products of those unions. So it's possible that that is the remnant of that kind of Greek myth entering into the Torah, or some other myth that led to the Greek myth happening, right? There could have been some other story from which Greek mythology stemmed to get the Greek mythology story. Okay, so the verse 3, the Lord said, God said, my breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh. Let the days allowed him be 120 years. Right? So, despite the fact that sons of God are cavorting with daughters of man, their length of days is going to be 120 years. Which isn't true, by the way, in the Torah, because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, we're told also, all lived more than 120 years. Okay, so God is saying here in chapter 6, people aren't going to live more than 120 years anymore, but starting for the descendants of Noah all the way to Abraham, people are still living several hundreds of years. So it's still a challenge. Okay, verse 4. Hanephilim hayu va'aretz bayamim hahem v'gam acharei chen asher yavo'u v'nei ha'elohim el benot ha'adam v'yaldu lahem hema ha'giborim asher me'olam anshe Hashem. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on the earth. We have no idea who the Nephilim are. When the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men, who bore them offspring. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. Again, so verses 2 through 4, a cryptic kind of reference to some ancient myth about humanity, or these unusual human creatures who roamed the earth at the time and who we have no reference to anymore. Biblical scholars, there are biblical scholars who devote their scholarship on the mythological references that are in the Bible. Now, the prophets, the book of Job, and the book of Psalms have cryptic references also to God subduing some mythological sea creatures. Okay, like Leviathan and Rachav are these mythological creatures that God had to subdue in order to create the world. The Torah doesn't talk about it in chapter 1 or 2, about any subduing of any mythological creatures. But like I said, Psalms, Book of Job, and some prophets have a reference to Leviathan and Rachav and this God subduing these sea creatures. Leviathan actually makes it into Jewish practice today. So there's an idea that after God subdued this sea creature called Leviathan, kind of like a huge whale, that God spreading the sukkah of peace over us. What is the wall of that sukkah? It is the skin of Leviathan. So God uses the sea creature that God subdued, Leviathan. God took the skin of that sea creature and made the sukkah of peace out of it. Also, God, when God killed Leviathan, God took the meat of Leviathan, and apparently it is the food for those who die. The souls of those who die go to be in God's presence in Olam Haba, in the next world. What do they eat? They eat Leviathan. Okay? So the souls of us, those who die, are eating Leviathan. And what does Leviathan taste like? It tastes like gefilte fish. Okay? So why do we eat gefilte fish on Shabbat? Where a lot of what we do on Shabbat is to be a taste, literally and figuratively, of the world to come. The world to come is supposed to be Shabbat all the time. Shabbat 24/7 is the world to come. We have Shabbat one day a week. So we're supposed to make Shabbat into a taste of the world to come, right? The fact that we don't have to work, the fact that we can rest, that is just part of what it means to be living in the world to come. When the Messiah will come and bring world to come on earth, that's what life will be like. So we're supposed to be, if we eat Leviathan when we get to the world to come, what is the taste of Shabbat of the world to come? We're supposed to eat gefilte fish on Shabbat, and gefilte fish is supposed to taste like Leviathan. Okay? So all of that, yes, Jules is shaking his head, all of that is just this part of this myth, that the remnants of the myth that get incorporated into the Jewish story. Okay, so you might wonder, why do we eat gefilte fish? We eat gefilte fish because that's the Eastern European heritage, but even more than that, it's also, by the way, Western European Sephardic heritage too. So there are different recipes for gefilte fish, just like there's different recipes for charoset, for the Seder meal. There are different recipes for gefilte fish. The myth of gefilte fish supposed to be a taste of the world to come is a universal Jewish myth. Ashkenazi Sephardi world. Now, in the Sephardi world, you don't call it gefilte fish because gefilte is Yiddish. So whatever they call it in Sephardic tradition, it's the same thing. The idea is it's a taste of the world to come. So there are some kind of things like that, that superstition, myth, childish kind of like stories that become part and parcel of who we are as a Jewish people, and tradition that gets passed down from one generation to the next. Okay, so something based on cryptic references in the Torah and in the Bible become part of the Jewish myth. That right? So the rabbis write midrash about it, and the midrash about it becomes then sometimes a source for Jewish practice and Jewish ideas. Okay, so that's verses 2 to 4, and this bizarre story of daughters of man and sons of God. Now, verse 5, and this is what I wanted to focus on, verse 5, which will then take us also into the beginning of next week's portion. But I'm allowing myself this going into next week's portion because it's a continuation of the chapter. So, verse 5, Vayar Adonai ki rabba ra'at ha'adam ba'aretz, v'chol yetzer machshavot libo rak ra kol hayom. God saw that the evil of man has become great on the earth, and all the inclinations of the thoughts of its heart, literally, but it could be mind, the inclination of the thoughts of man's mind is only evil all the time. So God saw that man had become corrupt and become mostly evil and not mostly good. 6. Vayinachem Adonai ki asa et ha'adam ba'aretz vayitatsev el libo. God was disappointed. That's vayinachem. So usually vayinachem, the root has something to do about being comforted, but it also means to change your mind or to be disappointed. So God either changed God's mind or was disappointed that God had made man on the earth, and was saddened. So, just adding human emotions to God. God was sad that God created man because man became evil. 7. Vayomer Adonai emche et ha'adam asher barati me'al pnei ha'adama me'adam ad behema ad remes ve'ad of hashamayim ki nichamti ki asitim. And God said, I will wipe out the man that I created from off the face of the earth, from man to animal to creepy crawlies to birds of the sky, because I changed my mind or disappointed that I made them. V'Noach matzachen ba'enei Adonai. And Noah, who we met in verse 32 of chapter 5 on page 33, Noah found favor in God's eyes. All right, so man had become evil. How do we know that man became evil? We're talking about the daughters of man who are cavorting with the sons of God. How do we know that man became evil? We don't have a backstory to explain how man became evil. We only know there's 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and somehow verses 5 to 7 are explaining how evil people had become and that God was upset about it. I want to go on. Now turn to page 41, the start of the portion Noah. So Noah found favor in the eyes of God. That's verse 8. Verse 9, Eile toldot Noach. This is the history of Noah. Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorotav. Noah was a righteous man, a pure righteous man in his generation. Eta Elohim hitalech Noach. Noah walked with God. Vayoled Noach shlosha banim. Noah gave birth to 3 sons, et Shem, et Ham, ve'et Yafet. See the word et there? The word et is extraneous. You don't need it there, but it's sometimes put there. That's the reminder of the et in the Cain and Abel being born. Et Cain ve'et Havel. So the extra ets, which aren't necessary in the verse in that story, or the birth of daughters here. I'm not sure if Rashi bothers to do that, but Noah gave birth to 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafet. And the important sentence I want, verse 11. Vatishachet haaretz lifnei Adonai. The land became corrupt before God. Vatimale, get this. Vatimale haaretz chamas. That's what I wanted to focus on. Vatimale haaretz chamas. The earth became corrupted. Okay, now the earth became corrupted. Chamas, the Hebrew word chamas. Right. Chamas here, chamas, lawlessness is really how it's translated here. If we look above the line, right-hand side on page 41, above the line, right-hand side, page 41, lawlessness. The universal corruption is further defined as Hamas, a term that elsewhere is the synonym of bloodshed, falsehood, or deceit. Okay? Bloodshed, falsehood, deceit. Okay? Hamas in Arabic, I looked this up. If you can believe Wikipedia, and I think sometimes you can, on Wikipedia, Hamas is an acronym of the Arabic phrase Haraka al-Mukawama al-Islamiyya. Okay, so it's an abbreviation for Haraka, so that's the chet from Hamas. Mukawama, that's the mem. Islamiyya, so that's the S sound from Hamas, meaning Islamic resistance movement. Right, so Hamas, abbreviation in Arabic for Islamic resistance movement, but there is an Arabic word, Hamas. Right, we have to remember, Arabic and Hebrew are very, very similar. It's kind of like Spanish and Italian. Okay, if you speak Spanish, you can understand Italian and vice versa. Okay, and French too. right? Three Romance languages, all based on Latin. Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, all stemming from ancient Semitic languages. So there are a lot of similarities between them. However, Hamas in Arabic means zeal, strength, and bravery. Zeal, strength, and bravery in Arabic. In Hebrew, lawlessness, bloodshed, falsehood. Fascinating, right? Fascinating. Okay. Um, I could say a lot about Hamas and how evil they are, and the differences between Arab society and Jewish society. We know this, okay? But it's fascinating how words, the same word, pronounced the exact same way, can have different meanings in different related languages. Okay, and that leads to uh, the um, the highlighting of different values in society as well. Right. So the Arabs are our cousins. The Torah makes that clear. We know that from history as well. They are our cousins. However, our cousins have a different set of moral and ethical values than we do. Uh, Nothing wrong with that, except when those different values become radicalized and militarized, and then in such a fundamentalist way that anyone who doesn't follow those radicalized vision of value need to be killed. So that's my sermon against Hamas. It's there for us to understand and to see. We can't help but ignore that the word Hamas originates in our Torah portion, in Hebrew, and how strange it is that it has been reinterpreted um, by Arab society. And here in our Torah, it's all about corruption and lawlessness. And we're not even told at the end of Bereisheet, we're not even told how that corruption happened. We're told earlier that God recognizes that people are created with a good inclination and a bad inclination. Right? I spoke about that on Rosh Hashanah in my sermon. But so that's the only way for the Torah to be able to explain how people do bad things, right? So we have to understand God created us that way, and God recognized that we're created with an evil, a drive to do good and a drive to do bad. And our goal that the Torah is trying to teach us, and Jewish and rabbinic Jewish society tries to teach us, is that we need to subdue the evil inclination as much as possible. We allow the evil inclination to, I spoke about it in my talk on Oppenheimer, right, on Yom Kippur Day. Sometimes the evil inclination causes us to do good things, and that's okay. That's because we have the good inclination to kind of redefine what the bad inclination is, and to take the bad and make it into good. But if we are psychotic, or if we just allow ourselves to let the bad inclination override the good inclination because of greed or whatever other influences, that's being wrong. And so a Jewish way of life is always to do good things as much as possible, so that our Yetzer HaTov, our good inclination, can always subdue the bad inclination. So that isn't explicitly stated in the Torah. It's just that it got to a point at the end of the portion Bereisheet where God had enough. And God needs to somehow teach humanity a lesson, and that's what the Noah story is all about. Any questions or comments about all of this?
So
Yes, Bob.
we found lawlessness throughout the land except for Noah.
Eh,
So he's gonna,
right, right. God, yeah. Noah somehow found favor in God's eyes.
okay, so he's gonna have the flood.
Yeah,
Noah survives,
right.
but then later on we have the um, Lot and his wife, and what was that town's name?
Sodom
Sodom.
and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah.
That's later after this.
Right.
So that's just one town that was bad.
Yeah, well, God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, right, with fire and brimstone.
And then we have the Tower of Babel where
That's
he
in
destroyed
next week's
everything.
portion also, chapter 11 or
Um,
10 or 11 of Genesis, yes. Yeah, so
Okay.
evil still persists, but God promises Noah that that God's not going to destroy the world again. There are other opportunities for God to do so, but God made the promise not to do that. So maybe that's to explain why doesn't God destroy the world again? So maybe so. In other words, whenever the Torah was edited, and I'm going with that perspective on where the Torah came from. The Torah is edited it's a number of oral traditions that got edited maybe in the time of King David, maybe in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah when they returned from exile in Babylonia. Whenever it was. Okay, somewhere between that time and that 500-year span, these oral traditions are getting written down. So it's possible that these people who are editing the story, the religious leaders of Israelite society at the time, trying to respond to the evil in the world around them. And why isn't God destroying the world like God did before? Right? And we continue to ask that question. Why didn't God intervene and destroy the Nazis? Right? If God could destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, God could have destroyed Berlin in 1939, right? Or at least um, destroy the Nazi party that lived in Berlin, right? And so if God can bring a flood, if God can direct the um, the destruction to just Sodom and Gomorrah, if God can direct the 10 plagues, why doesn't God do that anymore, right? So I think that the Torah and rabbinic literature is all about how we as human beings partner with God to eradicate evil from our world. Right? So this is a question that religious people in Israel are asking right now. That on Shmini Atzeret, right? It was Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah in Israel on Shabbat. It was Shmini Atzeret for us. It's the prayer for rain, a prayer in which we're recognizing our vulnerability and recognizing that we might not be worthy of God's blessing. But we want to be worthy of God's blessing at the end of this high holiday season so that we will be blessed by rain. And then Hamas, in waves of monstrosity and barbarism, kill, right now the number is over 1,200 Israelis. So for a traditional religious Jew, the answer to the prayer for rain was given quite clearly that God is not happy with us, and this is destruction that God brought to the people of Israel. Now, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. But there are ultra Orthodox Jews who do believe that and believe right now that those 1,200 Israelis were killed by Hamas because God wanted it to happen. That's not my understanding of God at all. If I only understood Judaism and theology to be that, I would not be a rabbi. I would not be a religious person. Okay, that is not my theology, but for the ultra Orthodox, it is. Okay, and the only answer they have to this um, uh, horrific scene is, who are we to question God's ways? God's eternal. We're here for a short time on earth. We don't see the answer right now. We're in the midst of suffering. God knows. Okay, again, that's not me, and that's not my theology, and most modern Jews do not believe that. Okay? So, um, the clearly events like Shabbat, and that is continuing as we speak, um, are the way in which are we confront evil every day, and Shabbat is a horrific example of that. And what do we do to respond to evil? Okay, so Israel is traumatized, the Jewish community is traumatized. We will never forget what happened on Shabbat. Right? So, like President Roosevelt said on December 8th, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. That's what October 7th of 2023 will be forever in Jewish history. Okay? So the question is, how did America respond to Pearl Harbor? How do we as a religious community, because that's what a Jewish community is, how do we as a Jewish community respond to October 7th? Okay, how do we respond to Hamas that has spread over the earth? That's our challenge. That's the human endeavor, is to respond to Hamas. Yes, Sumner. You have to unmute. Just press the
Yeah,
space button.
sorry about that.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just thinking about through the ages
Yeah,
and the centuries of pogroms
yeah,
hitting, you know, Orthodox Orthodox Jews.
yeah.
Did they articulate what you were just describing?
I mean, the Yom Kippur, the High Holiday Liturgy is about, and the Yom Kippur Martyrology service in particular is all about suffering, how Jews were martyrs from the oppressive, murderous hordes in which they're living. So the Crusades march across Europe. The Khmelnytsky pogroms, the Cossacks marched across the Russian Pale of Settlement, and Jews were the target and were left decimated by them. And the traditional prayers that we have in the Machzor to reflect that is all about, we give up our lives to God, and we will always be ready to do that because we are firm in our belief that we are right and that we will be blessed. And if not in our lifetime, then we'll be rewarded. The martyrs will be rewarded in life and the hereafter. It's not to say that we're seeking martyrdom, but the reward for the martyr is eternal life. And that God, the Unatana Tokef prayer on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is also a response to that. How do we deal with this evil around us? Who shall live? Who shall die? God makes that decision. Teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and acts of justice. That's how we overcome. How we kind of can get a sense of control, which we can't. We can't control our lives. We can just do the best we can and pray for the best. With teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah, we have to not just pray for the best, we have to act for the best too. And we still might be destroyed. 1,200 of our family could be killed by Hamas. The families, babies beheaded. Nobody deserves that. It's despicable. It's unspeakable. How do we respond to that? We can't give in. We can't give in. We have to overcome. We have to provide support to our Israeli family. So we have to provide support to the state of Israel, and we have to ensure that Israel can eradicate Hamas forever. It's the only option. And President Biden said it. That's it's really the unbelievable thing. Knowing Jewish history, How many leaders of countries in which Jews have lived have been so much stalwart support of its Jewish community? Right? In 2,000 years of Jewish history, to have a president say what he said yesterday, we stand with Israel. Crystal clear, we stand with Israel. The unspeakable evil, he said. All right, so if the President of the United States can say that, then that further reinforces the message that we need to stand up against this evil. That's the only, only option we have. Can't give in to it. Can't let it win. You have to defeat it.
And we can't give in because we're the chosen people. What
No,
if
we can't give in because we're moral and we have a. I'm not going to say that, Sumner. We can't give in because we're better than everybody else. No, we can't give in because our ethics and morality teaches us that we can't give in. Because I would say Muslim society would also say you can't give in to this. From the little bit I know about traditional Muslim society, Hamas is not traditional, ISIS is not traditional, the Taliban are not traditional. Okay? They are fundamentalist extremists. Average normative Muslims also preach peace and love. Okay? Average normative Christians, not the Crusaders, normative Christians also preach peace and love. So the world who stands on ethics and morality says you can't give in. Okay? You can't. If you give in, that means that you're saying that you don't believe in your system of ethics and morality anymore, and you are letting evil win. And the way the world works is you can't let evil win, and you have to start with yourself. If you see in yourself a desire to do bad, you need to defeat that in yourself. Then you need to work with people around you, a ripple effect, till you makes the whole global community advocating for morality and ethics. That's the way it's supposed to work. All right. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. There are countries in this world who could care less about ethics and morality, and so that's a major thing to have to work with, and the fact that as this war is going on, there are pro-Palestine rallies that are going on too, where they're screaming death to the Jews. So but this is something that we need. It's all of this dirty laundry is being aired, and it needs to just be thrown away. And we have to eradicate Hamas off the face of the earth, just like Genesis chapter 6 says, and specifically in what's going on. Okay. Jules, did you have a question? Comment? Yeah, so you have to unmute, Jules. Just press the space bar and hold it down, and you can unmute that way. There you go. Hold it. Keep. You have to keep holding it down. There. Keep it pressed down. Now you can talk.
I was intrigued by this question.
Yeah.
Given I've listened to what you said very carefully,
Yeah.
and I ask myself a question. Now I want to eradicate them, and I agree they should be. Okay, let me give you a question.
Yeah.
You're going into Gaza. This is the ultimate. You're going into Gaza, and you have 2 million people living there.
Jules,
And
you're right. You're right. And it's going to look really bad for Israel right now. It already has started to look bad because breaking news this morning on WTOP, the power plant in Gaza is running out of fuel. They can't supply power anymore. All right, that's just the beginning of news outlets and people saying, look at the bad that Israel is doing. Right? It's not good. Getting the way people don't understand that the way the Hamas fights is that they play into Western sensibilities while killing their own people. Why did Israel blow up 3 mosques in Gaza over the course of these past 5 days. Why? Not because they are against Islam. No, because those mosques are military warehouses. They store ammunition in those mosques. So, of course, it's going to look bad for Israel that they're doing it. And Hamas is never going to say, we stored ammunition in those mosques. No, they're going to let Israel clean up the dirt. So it's terrible. Why were schools blown up? Because schools are used as Hamas headquarters and military warehouses too. It's just awful. So Israel has this fight on its hands. So far, America is behind them. So far, if there would be bipartisan, almost unanimous support of Israel right now in eradicating Hamas, but that's today. In the next couple of days, it's going to be awful. We're going far afield, though, with our Torah study. I do want to be aware of that. We'll talk more about this on Jews in the News on Monday. My Israel trip, obviously, is canceled. So there will be Jews in the News the next 2 Mondays when there wasn't going to be because I was supposed to be in Israel. And in fact, one day on the Israel trip, we were supposed to go to Sderot. So maybe someday soon we'll get back to an Israel trip. Anyway.
Well, Golda Meir said it best. When
Yeah.
they stop hating us more, they start loving themselves more than they hate us.
Right. That's right. Something like that. Exactly right. Yes. Okay, folks, have a good rest of the day. Peace to Israel. And see you next week on Torah study.
I'll
Thank
never
you.
look a pair of
Thank you.
gefilte fish in the face again.
That's right.